Good afternoon to all of you. 안녕하세요, 여러분. Welcome to the 7th Philippine Korean Studies Symposium. I am Yen Chua, Senior Lecturer of the Department of Linguistics, University of the Philippines, Diliman, and I will be your moderator for today's event. Thank you very much for joining today's event through the UPKRC's YouTube channel. We are delighted to welcome you all. I am looking forward to an informative and engaging discussion with you for the entire duration of the event. So let us now officially begin the 7th Philippine Korean Studies Symposium with some congratulatory messages. First, we have Dr. Maria Bernadette L. Abrera, Dean of the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy, University of the Philippines, Diliman.
It is a pleasure for me to send this congratulatory message to the 7th Philippine Korean Studies Symposium, now being held online because of the pandemic. During this period, we are all wary of the third wave of coronavirus, now reported in the UK, South Africa, Spain, and other areas. But there is an earlier wave that we have all welcomed and embraced for almost 2 decades now, and which is helping us survive the COVID quarantine. I am referring to Hallyu, of course. The launch of the Korean wave at the beginning of the 21st century had come at the heels of the Asian financial crisis. Marketers now point to this economic reversal and the Korean response to build on local culture and develop homegrown talents as the beginning of Hallyu that took Asia and eventually the rest of the world, even Korea itself, by surprise. It is well to learn from this response to the crisis. The sustained and diverse production of culture products came as a result of South Korea's Ministry of Culture decision to create 300 culture-based departments in universities across Korea. These were programs on cultural heritage studies, departments on Korean language and literature, including programs at the graduate level. It would do well for us, for Philippine Congress, to consider this significant point that the promotion and support for culture studies and language, not its suppression, beginning with one's heritage and language, provide a considerable advantage in propelling not just the national image, but the national brand in the world arena. From the immense popularity of K-pop and K-drama that has raised its stars to cult status, the Korean business sector was quick to ride the trend to market everything else. As Hallyu improved the Korean brand value affecting medical tourism, cosmetics and the beauty industry, Korean cuisine and fashion, and K-drama location tourism. Next year marks the 20th anniversary of Winter Sonata, the famous saga of a pure and noble love that marked the beginning of Hallyu across Asia. This wave has now covered the entire globe as we witnessed Parasite make history by winning the Palme d'Or in Cannes, the Golden Globe, and of course, the Oscars. 4 Oscars. Since this 7th symposium will focus on creative industry development, we will note the big challenge, and I hope we turn it into an opportunity for the Philippines not only to ride this wave, but to learn from it, not only in the translation and dubbing to adaptations, but the cultural infrastructure that need to be in place in order to systematically develop content, and the political and economic support that would then produce such content. Congratulations then to the organizers of this symposium, the CSSP Department of Linguistics, the UP Korea Research Center, through the Korea Foundation of the Philippines. Do continue to support the growth of academic research on Korea-related studies by Filipino scholars and strengthen the academic networks between our two countries. I wish you a very successful 7th Philippine Korean Studies Symposium. Congratulations!
Thank you very much, Tina Brera, for that very warm message. Our next message then comes from Seoul, South Korea. Let us hear His Excellency Christian L. De Jesus, Chargé d'Affaires ad interim of the Embassy of the Republic of the Philippines in Seoul.
Dr. Maria Bernadette L. Abrera, Dean, College of Social Sciences and Philosophy, University of the Philippines, Diliman. Director Im Yong-nga, Korean Cultural Center in the Philippines. Officers of the UP Korea Research Center, distinguished moderators, presenters, and researchers. Ladies and gentlemen, annyeonghasimnika at mabuhay. I want to start by saying that it is a great honor and pleasure to be invited to deliver the congratulatory remarks for the 7th Philippine Korea Studies Symposium. I wish to take this opportunity to express my sincerest congratulations to the organizers of this event, the UP Korea Research Center, the Korea Foundation, and the UP Department of Linguistics for another successful symposium that brings together the top researchers and scholars on Philippine and Korean culture. The Philippine government considers our strong people-to-people cooperation with South Korea as one of the cornerstones of the Philippines-Korea bilateral relations. As of the latest count, more than 48,100 Filipinos live and work in South Korea, including more than 12,000 Filipino spouses of Korean nationals. There are tens of thousands of Filipino-Korean children in South Korea who straddle the Filipino and Korean cultures. In the years before the COVID-19 pandemic, more than 1.5 million Koreans visited the Philippines annually as tourists, enjoying our beaches, festivals, food, and natural Filipino charm and hospitality. Many Koreans have also developed strong business, cultural, and personal connections in the Philippines and the Filipino people. Despite the challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought about, I am confident that these ties linking the Filipino and Korean peoples will continue to grow more robust in the coming years. The Philippine government recognizes the importance of cultural awareness in elevating the lives of our people and its role in achieving social inclusion, cohesion, and equity. As articulated in the Philippine Development Plan, culture is one of the pillars for achieving inclusive, sustainable, and human-centered development. We need a nuanced understanding of culture and cultural contexts to guide the formulation of policies and the design of development interventions. Research in this area would be beneficial in our work as we engage our kababayans in the diaspora, including second and third generation Filipinos in destination countries who are likely to be less rooted in Filipino culture and history while navigating the culture of their host countries. Of course, we cannot overlook the fact that the Korean wave, or Hallyu, continues to dramatically touch and influence people worldwide, sustaining the global interest in Korean popular culture, drama, art, celebrities, food, literature, and language. Filipinos are not immune to the charms of Korean culture. It would not be an exaggeration when I say that almost all Filipinos have encountered Korean cultural products at one point or another. It is a rare Filipino who has never watched a Korean drama, used a Korean beauty product, or listened to Korean music. Once again, I wish to congratulate the symposium organizers and the participating scholars for the successful conduct of the 7th Philippines Korea Studies Symposium. This virtual platform will highlight developments in the Philippines, Republic of Korea cultural cooperation and engagement. For the next 2 days, we will learn from the presentations of distinguished experts as they talk on cultural diplomacy, soft power, and the opportunities in the Philippine creative industries. I look forward to a fruitful discussion and interactions with the speakers and participants. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat. Kamsahamnida.
Thank you so much, Honorable De Jesus. We hope to have you in person soon when traveling becomes a lot easier. And last but not the least, we have Ms. Yong Ngaim, Director of the Korean Cultural Center in the Philippines.
안녕하세요. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to congratulate all the presenters. Thank you for your hard work and you're interested in Korea and its culture and policies. Congratulations also to the UP Korean Research Center for successfully organizing this event. I have noticed that the interest in boosting the Philippines creative industry is rising among the politicians, artists, and many others. I also believe that the growth of the creative industry will contribute positively not only to the economy of the Philippines, but also to increasing the brand value of the Philippines. In line with it, KCC has also recently hosted our own webinar titled Rediscover the Korean Creative Industry to share our knowledge on video industry to the local expert. Korean will be a good partner in the creative industry of the Philippines. I hope the symposium could help enrich your knowledge and furthermore help promote the public understanding of the creative industry. Congratulations once again and thank you for inviting me today. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Director Im. 감사합니다. Please allow me to introduce the organizers of today's event. The UP Korea Research Center was launched in April 2016 to provide Filipino scholars and researchers with opportunities to widen their interest in Korean studies. The center conducts various academic and cultural activities for scholars and professionals and serves as a university-wide hub that promotes and develops Korean studies in the Philippines. For more information and updates on the UPKRC, you may visit their Facebook page, www.facebook.com/UPKRC. The UP Department of Linguistics, established August 28, 1922, has been at the forefront of language studies in the Philippines, primarily on the scientific study, preservation, and promotion of Philippine languages and dialects through teaching, research, and publication. It also aims to contribute to general and theoretical linguistics and use research to significantly help in addressing language issues in the country. Housed in the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy, the department is the only institution in the country that offers BA, MA, and PhD degrees in linguistics. It is designated by CHED as a Center of Excellence in Foreign Languages for its contributions to the improvement of teaching of the national languages of Asia. It offers a roster of Asian languages which are integrated in the BA Linguistics course plans, Bahasa Indonesia Malaysia, Japanese, and Korean, and houses university-instituted language courses such as Mandarin, Thai, and Persian. The department regularly provides training through the summer seminars in linguistics and extramural classes in Asian languages. Before we proceed to our first presentation, We would like to remind our audience of some house rules. You may type your questions and comments in the YouTube chat room throughout the presentations and discussions. Our speakers will then answer them during the open forum. We will have the open forum after the two presentations. Please be reminded that this symposium is a safe space for the exchange of ideas and healthy discussion. We do not tolerate any form of bullying or trolling, academic or otherwise. The organizing committee reserves the right to remove participants who would cause any disruptions in any part of the program. Let us begin. We have two exciting research presentations this afternoon. So, without further ado, let me introduce today's first speaker. Erik Paolo Capistrano, PhD, is a Bangko Sentral na Pilipinas Professor of Business Administration of the University of the Philippines, Cesar E. A. Verata School of Business. He is also a principal investigator at the University of the Philippines Korea Research Center. He earned his PhD in International Management from National Chongqing University in Taiwan. His research on supply chain management, management of innovation, management of information technology, and the Korean Wave appear across international and national academic journals, books and book chapters, policy briefs, and newsletters. He also serves as an administrator for Socified, the international fan forum site for the Korean pop girl group, Girls' Generation. Today, Dr. Capistrano will share with us his presentation entitled Exploring Learning and Improvement Opportunities for the Philippine Creatives Industry, a Value Chain and Supply Chain Approach. Let us all welcome Dr. Capistrano.
Okay, so yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for that warm introduction. And yes, it might be looking like a paradox that I have this academic background and yet at the same time I'm a fanboy. So those are the two things that actually power this kind of research that I would be doing.
I could clearly identify with that, Dr. Capistrano. So
yeah. So okay, so for this afternoon, I will be showing the more professional side to things, and but yeah, so let me start by sharing my presentation for you this afternoon. So in 3, 2, 1. Okay. Okay. So yeah. So is everybody seeing the presentation now?
yes, we can.
Okay, so yeah, so let's begin. So despite the fact that this is kind of like a very wordy, title here, what we're going to talk about this afternoon will be and just an initial approach to what I've been trying to do for the past year and a half. So just to start things off. So of course we will start with an introduction to this and basically what triggered this research. So for the past few months or past several months, I've been seeing a lot of articles and reactions regarding the Philippine feedback on Korean dramas. The pandemic has caused a significant increase in the number of Filipinos watching Korean dramas, for instance. But at the same time, we can also see that there are a lot of positive and negative feedback regarding the consumption of these dramas. So I figured that it would be best, at least as far as I'm concerned, to kind of like study or examine what makes it so much. What makes Filipinos really become attracted to a lot of this Korean content, and at the same time look at it also from a production side, because that's what we want to also have. We want to have our own Philippine content to at least improve in the sense that we can catch up to our Korean counterparts. Okay? So that's what actually triggered this research. So what does this research push for? We push for that creative industries is supposed to be a multifaceted and multidisciplinary issue involving many entities and stakeholders. So what we're seeing here is that it should not only be a cluster within a country's economy, but as a driver of growth as well. Yes, because it provides direct and indirect jobs and indirect and direct commercial returns. And for that matter, it is high time that we think about that the industry is ripe for innovations. And adoptions of information and communication technologies and digital transformations has been argued as one of the biggest contributors that can help us enhance our own creative industries. So we look first at some of the definitions, and then we look at the value chain and supply chain of the creative industries as a whole. So we're going to consider four major definitions that, based on my research so far, has been the most widely used or the most common definitions. So we have the CAVES definition, in which creative industries provide goods and services in the form of books and magazines, visual and performing arts, sound recordings, television and film, fashion, toys, and games, and that are usually associated with cultural, artistic, or entertainment value. Another definition that has been widely used in academic research is the one that was put forth by the government of the United Kingdom, which says that creative industries are rooted in individual creativity, skill, and talent that have, through intellectual property generation and exploitation, the potential for wealth and job creation. And this definition also highlights the importance of revitalizing and regenerating communities. So there's an aspect there in the UK definition that it should also help communities develop further. The other two definitions that I will be sharing is the one from UNESCO and the one from WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization. So they state that for the UNESCO, it's all about production, reproduction, promotion, and distribution, and or commercialization of cultural, artistic, and or heritage-related goods, services, and activities. Okay? But the UNESCO definition also wants to emphasize on the sustainability angle of these creative industries. As for the WIPO definition, we look at, obviously, the focus there more is on the protection of copyright works and intellectual property. Okay, so these are the four definitions that we will be working with when it comes to the rest of today's presentation. So just some examples of what creative value chains look like. So you're seeing one here. Okay, one here it's sourced from Valera and Soler regarding the Colombian creative industry. So the supply chain is really like a chain of activities that would really define and justify the value that we give to these industries. And the value can be both in terms of economic, it can be in terms of cultural, it can be in terms of social value that we're looking at. So this is just one of many examples that we can see. Yeah. Now, another one that I want to share would be something about the value chain for digital content. This is what a lot of us have been engaged in, okay, for especially with those who are fortunate enough to consume Netflix or VU or iQIYI, for instance, like me, or even YouTube. This, what you're seeing right now, is the value chain of digital content. So it all starts with the production of content, but we also see that there's a lot of licensed digital distributors, there's a lot of technical intermediaries, and for that matter, we can ultimately consume these content through a lot of devices, through our laptops, our desktops, our smart TVs, our phones, etc. Okay, so that's basically like a bird's eye view of what the creative industry's value chains look like. Okay, but we're going to focus on some of the issues that influence the flows that are happening within these value chains. So I've identified 4 issues here. Okay, 4 common issues. The first one is the varying perceptions on value contributions. So we cannot do away with the fact that there is some hierarchy and tier systems that define how much value each entity are perceived to contribute. Okay. Then, for that matter, unfortunately, there are some sectors that are omitted or excluded from the definition of what a creative industry is, or which is this sector included in the creative industry. That's one big issue there. And of course, there's also the risk of overvaluation and undervaluation of some of the creative industries players and output that they produce. And one of the things also that's hounding our sense of value is that there's a lack of structural support in the form of regulation, protection, education, and innovation. Okay, and coupled with that would be the lack of long-term strategic directions, widely agreed upon sets of performance metrics, and difficulties of self-sustainability. So these are some of the big issues that are hounding this particular portion on value contributions. So the other issues would include the role of ICT and R&D, research and development. So there is an intensifying adoption and use of ICTs, as probably a lot of us would have already appreciated. But the main point here is that we should be able to connect policies on ICT adoption and use and R&D efforts with production and distribution, and with experiences, cultural identities, and social empowerment. Okay. And for that matter, many of the current studies on this particular issue has been centered on three fields of study: the creative industries themselves, the creation of creative cities, and the formation of creative classes. Okay. Now, the next two issues are, the third one will be the knowledge management, which is generating, transferring, and sharing knowledge and skills is a significant source of value. We need to have that mechanism wherein we can transfer what I know to what you will know, or what you would know to I should know. Okay, so it leads to an interesting avenue for innovation and growth, both in the generalist and specialist perspectives. And then the last issue would be the internationalization and co-production. This is a growing trend. Okay, as we can see later on when I talk about South Korea, this phenomenon on internationalization and globalization has been a key driver towards initiatives in co-creation and co-production, which can span different countries. And this enables us to share costs and risks and expand the market reach. Okay, so these are the main reasons why organizations would opt to have co-creation, co-production, and co-distribution. Now, on the other hand, of course, we have the supply chain. So this is an example of supply chain for the K-pop market. So, okay, they said that I'm a Girls' Generation fan. So I have some idea of how SM Entertainment does it. So we have global casting. Okay, we have global casting events, global casting systems, and then which those who are accepted would undergo training and talent development, and then later on they will form the group. Okay, and then it will then have content, and then they will have some promotion distribution, and then later on some customer relationship management in the form of fan service or fan events. Right, so this is a typical example of a supply chain that's happening with K-pop. Another way that we can look at it would be how each of the organizations have been interacting with each other when it comes to interacting with each other and what they produce. So you have artists, writers, and producers. And then you have YouTube and Facebook. You have the fans, and then you have the enterprises, the agencies that pay for all of this. So this is another way that we can look at the supply chain, okay, for Korean pop music. Okay. So what are some of the issues that are hounding the supply chain, okay, here? So first of all, we look at four things. We look at the structure of its activities. So we look at the development, production, distribution, and marketing, export and export support, and provisions for market and legal information, among others. So, and then some researchers have tried to look at it, to group all of these activities into 6 main areas, which would include technology, laws and regulation, industry structure, organizational structure, occupational careers, and market dynamics. Okay. Many areas are either labor-intensive and requiring investments towards human capital or supported by digital activities. Okay. But then, we now see a lot of these creative enterprises evolving with the use of these digital technologies. So those are the ones that influence the structure of the activities. The second point will be the choice of actors. So the supply chain is very diverse. It's not just about the actors and actresses. It's not just about the celebrities, the singers, the stage performers, stage that we all see. It's not just that. It's also about all of the people behind it, the producers, the writers, the funders, okay, the directors, etc. But however, we also want to see, we also want to appreciate the fact that these entities are not limited within the arts, but we also include those people who are in literature, who are even in sciences. They can be a part, okay, of the creative industry supply chain, because they can contribute different knowledge, practices, and know-how that can make, okay, the supply chain is flows within the creative industries, something that can be something better to look at. And there are also interactions between and amongst relevant government bureaucrats, content producers, consumers, and even citizens. You and I can have a part in this supply chain. Okay. Interestingly enough, because of internationalization and globalization, the supply chain would also include entities who interact with each other across geographical borders, as we can see, as we will have an example of that later on. Okay. What's also interesting here is that most actors in this supply chain will have more than one role. Okay? They're not limited to one specific role or one specific contribution within the supply chain. We'll have a lot. The third issue would be on the governance mechanisms. Okay, so here's one of the trickiest or one of the most complex aspects of creative industry supply chain, and this because the structures are very complex, but can also widely vary. So contractual relationships, for one, these can be from a limited time basis or for one project. And this caused a lot of volatility and increased levels of competitiveness within the industry. There are also increasing interdependence of different supply chain entities with one another. And this increases the complexity of production and distribution processes. And here's the other thing about the governance mechanisms. We all have different tastes. Many of us would not agree that this is the best drama or this is the best girl group or boy group or idol or singer or whatnot. We have different tastes. And even, let's say, within one artist, we can have different perceptions and feedback on the varying content that they provide. And this gives a lot of complexity as far as the governance structure is concerned, specifically on the point on either overvaluing or accurately predicting the value or undervaluing the content that's actually being given. And because of this increasing attention to value contributions as well, there have also been increasing efforts to either vertically or horizontally integrate activities, meaning one company who was probably just in production would also go into distribution. Okay, so something like that. So because they know that they can get more value out of it. The last part would be on the coordination structure. So since the creative industry is characterized by significant uncertainty and diversity, due to the following reasons, which include how consumers will value creative content, how creative workers are caring more about their craft rather than the commercial value, producing creative content requiring a diverse set of skills and expertise, a near infinite variety of consumer tastes, presences of hierarchy to differentiate skills. Okay, there are some that have a bigger contribution. There are some that has a lesser contribution. Okay, so and then we also have the timeliness of the production and distribution of creative content. We have strict deadlines, or we have long schedules. So there's a lot of these sub-factors that we're seeing here that makes coordination very difficult for us to achieve smoothly, properly. And then another item here would be the longevity regarding the content producer's ability to collect rents from their work. What do I mean? Some creative content is only a hit or can have a very can have a very big market for only a short period of time. But there are some that also have still remain popular for years, even decades. So we don't know how long that we are able to collect revenue. We are able to maintain the attention and the longevity of whatever creative content that we are producing. So what has South Korea done? So what have they done and what are they doing? So as you can see here, there've been a lot of different articles about it as well, and both from Filipino and foreign media releases. We have a number of these articles that reveal to us how they are doing it, and we're going to classify them along those issues that I've just shared with you. So what have they done? So in terms of the value perceptions and value contributions, they've identified that most of the value contributions of South Korean creative content will come from television, film, video games. Video games is actually one of the most underrated, okay? But they bring in large amounts of foreign currency, okay, for the South Korean economy, and pop music. Okay, so that's where the value is. As for ICT and R&D, they've been successfully employing ICTs, okay, to producers to transform its content from audio to include visuals, consumers to possess convenient access to content, distributors to upgrade from domestic to international, and business context to transform and from maintaining limited interactions to creating synergistic networks. In other words, because of ICTs, it's become easier for us. I know, okay, I've been looking at the comments from on the YouTube channel. I can see a lot of fans, a lot of K-pop fans. So I bet a lot of you would have bought tickets to either Weverse or V-Live concerts. So that's a new thing for us, right? Or we've been able to explore not only Netflix, but also VU and HEE, or even some of the South Korean VODs, the video on demand platforms, for us to real-time consume content. Okay. Not to mention, ICT has been a very useful tool for us, for those who want to learn Korean, so that we can watch content without subtitles. This has been a very huge deal for us. Okay. Other things would include now for the knowledge management. So they have been able to develop complementary business models, technologies, and markets. They've been able to create a co-evolution of production and distribution processes. And by doing so, they were able to simplify production and distribution, promotion and marketing processes for the content that they've been doing. And for the internationalization and co-production, so with the entry of Netflix in the Korean market, South Korean companies such as Studio Dragon, TVN, and JTBC have been able to produce and distribute content. Okay, today's Thursday, right? Okay, so today's Thursday. So incidentally, I've mentioned TVN here, and thanks to Netflix, later tonight, I'll be able to catch again my favorite K-drama right now, which is Hospital Playlist. Okay, so and it enables us to actually consume content that way. So I can't wait what will happen tonight. Okay, so to say. So yeah. So those are it's because of those phenomena that there will be South Korea has been able to maximize their internationalization and co-production efforts. Okay, with this one. Okay. So what else have they been doing? So structure of activities. We're now going to the supply chain dimensions. There are easier efforts to preserve and maintain the underlying moods and feelings until the drama ends, because they have an explicitly stated number of drama episodes to be produced. We know that a drama is going to run for 16 to 20 episodes or 24 episodes, okay, for a particular season. So that being said, the structure of activities that's happening there is easier to visualize, easier to plan for. It's easier to more carefully develop concepts and storylines, flesh out details, acquire talent, practice, okay, address budgetary concerns, work around timetables. So we have all that. Okay, and then for the next three, the choice of actors, governance mechanisms, and coordination structures, where we are characterized as hierarchical, relying on top-down planning, resource mobilization, investments, infrastructure, training and skills development, and export support. However, one interesting thing that we've seen with the South Korean experience is that yes, government provides massive subsidy programs or non-financial, non-monetary support, but they employ what we call an arm's length principle. What do they mean? What does that mean? They don't directly intervene. Like there are buffers in between. There are like semi-government or non-government organizations composed of experts and professionals that do help government. Okay, they do help government craft policy, but at the same time, because they are professionals, they are experts, they're able to apply and implement policies in a more effective manner. Furthermore, okay, so we also look at some influence of the private sector and influence of public sector efforts. We cannot deal, this part is an additional item here because many studies in the past have always been acknowledging the efforts of both the private sector and the public sector. So what the thing about there is that producers can underscore the Koreanness that attract global audiences, okay, rather than resulting to what we call cultural hybridity. Okay. So for instance, okay, when I was typing this up and then when I was brooding through it, I kind of thought about again two shows, for instance, two shows that I think about. First of all, since again, going back to my fanboying tendencies, there's this show called Amazing Saturday. And what I love about that show is that it's not just about seeing Taeyeon there every weekend, no, but it's also about getting to know more about the food, okay, the food that's being featured in the show, and the songs that are being showcased there. So for those of you who know Amazing Saturday, okay, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. But for those who are unfamiliar with it, please check it out. Okay, it's one of those shows that really try to convey many aspects of present day Korean pop culture. The other one is a more established show. This is Running Man. Okay? For those of you who are familiar with Running Man, so that's another show that basically I perceive that as not only looking at the sights and sounds of South Korea when they go around and then do an episode, but it's also about the games that they're playing that highlights a lot of Korean pop culture that we're not really familiar with. Okay, the jokes, and which reflects what the humor is, etc., etc. And there's a lot more of those shows that are around. The second one is the content. The content is starting to include more contemporary and more controversial themes. So taking a page from what happened in the Binibining Pilipinas. What happened last weekend, diba? The question of Boy Abunda. We all know where that came from. Diba? It's from the drama It's Okay to Not Be Okay. Diba? So mental health issues is something that's already slowly being integrated into South Korean society. They're talking about it more openly, etc., etc. And then another thing about it would be the like some LGBTQIA undertones in some of the dramas that we're seeing as well. We've been seeing more and more of that. So those are other things that we've been seeing that touching on more contemporary and more controversial themes, apart from the usual love stories that we've all grown to love. And of course, the influence of public sector efforts. Okay, it's also stated there. We've been repeatedly saying all of this. But one thing I would like to emphasize here is that this intensified and more focused state intervention and support is a result more of the Korean wave already gaining massive international popularity. A lot of Korean scholars in particular have been pushing this, that the government came in because the Korean wave became popular. and they were able to make it more popular and more widespread. So that's what it means there. Okay. So we now look at the Philippine context. So the Philippine context here is also a very interesting year. So we're gonna look at it at a glance first. So since 2014, the creative industries in the Philippines accounted for 7.34% of the country's GDP, and an amazing 14.14% of employment. It's actually a huge thing. Okay, it's actually a huge thing. Okay, but the thing is also, we know that there's an increasing number of Filipinos who perform in many places around the world, such as in Broadway. Okay, they're the ones who are donning costumes in Disneyland theme parks or dancing in those short performances that we see in some of the stage performances in Disneyland. But they also work as illustrators and animators for Hollywood films. We can already see a lot of these Filipinos in there. So we do have the talent. Unfortunately, in the domestic setting, there are sentiments of undervaluation and underappreciation of the creatives that we see here. So some of the recommended focus points from a number of experts and researchers in the field would be as follows. So we want to aspire. Okay, we want to aspire to become a creative economy in Southeast Asia in advertising, film, animation, game development, graphic design, and digital design. Okay, and then both the CECP and the DTI hopes to touch on 6 cultural domains to make this happen. So in order to uplift these 6, we want to look at cultural and national heritage, performance and celebration, visual arts and artisan products, books and press, broadcast and interactive media, and of course, creative services. And the test now also identified 6 major fields in creative industries: heritage and fine arts, design and architecture, audiovisuals, printing and publishing, creative services, science and technology. So some of the present suggestions for us to uplift all of this will be as follows. So we want to establish creative hubs, clusters, and cities for development, production, research, and education. We also want to take advantage of the present strengths of the country's BPO industry. Take note, the game development sector is considered a part of the BPO sector. So this is what I'm actually talking about here. And it's actually one of the fastest growing sectors within the BPO industry in terms of the game development. Okay, so but another thing that's also curious here is there's a couple of people here that I've seen that they want to inculcate or integrate a sense of entrepreneurship, to consider commercial and sustainable angles for their creative works. A lot of our art, I probably, for some of you who are into fan arts and fan arts, for instance, there have been some complaints that there have been a number of requests from fans, for instance, to create content, but they do it for free. Okay, that shouldn't be the case all the time. Okay, that should be the case all the time. You want to pay these people. Okay, you want to compensate them for the creative work that they've been doing. Okay, so and we want to have more of that. Okay, we want to have, so even though it's like fan arts or commissioned works, let's say for fans, we pay them. Okay, we have to pay them to do it. Okay. So in this case, we want to identify profitable target markets and audiences, thinking about procurement and production cost efficiencies, managing monetary and non-monetary resources more efficiently. Okay, employing intellectual property rights and copyright protections would be some of the other things that we can talk about here. Okay, so some of the recent bright spots in the industry, of course, despite all of the challenges and struggles we're seeing right now, I'm very hopeful. I'm actually very hopeful that because we have a lot of recent bright spots that we have in terms of the Philippine industry. So, for instance, the Film Philippines and our government partners in the film industry have been promoting what they call a co-production fund. So there's a lot of this. Okay, there's a lot of these financial incentives that are happening here to encourage a lot of international co-productions in the Philippines. So as some of the examples that you're seeing, there's an ASEAN co-production fund. So a selective fund up to 150,000 US dollars to all ASEAN origin countries with a co-production agreement. Okay, co-production agreement with a duly registered Filipino production company. And then another thing I really find very interesting is the film location incentive program. So you shoot in the Philippines, you get some rebate. That's the gist for this program. Okay, let's say a foreign production company would come here, they partner with a Filipino firm, they shoot in a Philippine location, they can get a rebate. Okay, for in some of the expenses that they've incurred. So we have a lot of this going around, and I do hope that we can have more widespread and more active participation and patronage of these efforts that have been doing by Film Philippines. Okay, that one. And a lot of more present efforts. Okay, a lot of more present efforts that we've seen here is, for instance, 13. Yeah, this is an example wherein we have an example that we have some a Filipino content and then an international production firm. Okay, an international production firm took notice of it and made it into a Netflix series. Okay, this is actually a very good thing for us because we can now have this venue and we can showcase. Okay, we can showcase a lot of our Filipino print content, translate them into animated. Okay, translate them into animated series for a global audience to consume. And the fact that it's in different languages, I think it's in English, Japanese, and Filipino at the very least. Then we can also appreciate the versatility that we have in terms of creative content that we're seeing here. Okay, of course, the other things that in terms of the music scene, are some of the K-pop inspired. Okay, the K-pop inspired groups that we have right now in the persons of SB19, BGYO, and BB. I'm actually very impressed as to how these people, people were able to produce and have content that are actually very good. Okay, they're actually very good, and it's inspired, but they're obviously inspired by K-pop. And the progress that these three groups that we have, these groups are gonna have, is something to actually watch out for. Okay, hopefully we can have more of their content out, and hopefully that we can support and we can more appreciate the efforts that they're being done by these three groups. Okay, I'm actually very hopeful for them. Okay, so some initial analysis here now, just to tie it back. So how can we examine the Philippine creative industries? So we're looking at it from initial SWOT analysis. Okay, here. So as for the strengths of the Philippine creative industries, we're looking at an increasing pool of talent. Okay, we have the talent, no doubt about it. And there's an increasing amount of talent that are being trained and developed overseas, and they are willing to disseminate and apply what they learn and experience in our local shores. Okay, and as I mentioned before, there are increasing channels in which we can actually contribute to internationalization and co-production efforts. Okay, and as for the choice of actors, there are increasing number of creative content entities and interested stakeholders who are willing to invest, upgrade, and upscale. Okay, the available talent pools are already there of good quality. If some of our those bright spots are a testament to that, then we do have this increasing pool of good quality, and we want to take advantage of those strengths. However, of course, there are some weaknesses. Okay, there's also some weaknesses that we have found here. So through the course of my literature review for this particular paper, I've kind of noticed that different stakeholders have been using different definitions of what creative industries here. I've shown you 4, and these 4 have appeared in different articles and different pieces and different commentaries. So that's the problem, because each of them have a different thrust. Then we haven't agreed yet of what kind of thrust should be common to start discussions and discourses on the direction of the creative industries. Also, we know that there's still poor infrastructure. We don't have a massive infrastructure to support the talent. And there's little to no recognition of potential for new ideas at the lower organizational levels as well. Most of the ideas being generated are still top heavy. Okay, we want to have more on the ground ideas to incubate. Okay, other things. So, and unfortunately, despite the successes of our present P-pop groups, there were some that were not very successful, and it's difficult. Okay, it's difficult to recoup the costs of that one right now, and the reputation for it, the reputation for it's kind of like a little difficult to manage this far. And governance as for the governance mechanisms, there's still poor resource allocation, but more importantly or more critically, there's little to no real metrics for risk assessment and valuation up to this point. But of course, fret not. We do have a lot of opportunities. Okay, so a lot of opportunities would include the increasing size of the market who are appreciative for fresh and new content. We also have initiatives on how each entity and stakeholder involved can contribute to the overall value. Okay, and identifying priority areas will help set strategic directions. Direct Joey Reyes, for instance, have said a lot about where can we start, how can we start, and all that. His blog has given us an extensive look into how the Philippine creatives can start going down the path similar to what the South Koreans did. And if you have time to look for it, please do. There's a lot of good points in what Direct Joey Reyes said. Okay. And ICT and R&D, of course, there are intensifying demand and to acquire better ICTs and R&D facilities, possible intensified utilization of the BPO industry as well to improve our content production, and of course the knowledge management. Like I said, there are many ways now to learn, study, replicate best practices and success stories, but that's not limited to that. Other opportunities would include initiatives to identify how each entity contributes to the supply chain from a macroeconomic level. The TESDA actually mapped out it. It's a little bit cumbersome here, but TESDA had a report in 2019, and they actually outlined many of the different entities that can be involved, okay, from the professionals to the academe to government, and what can they actually contribute. And a deeper appreciation of that TESDA report can help us move with the structure of activities, and also for the choice of actors. Okay, again, referring back to the TESDA report, there are initiatives wherein the profession, sectors, actors, stakeholders, etc., are being identified and are being defined as to what kind of contribution they can do. Okay. Governance mechanisms, there are increasing recognition and clamor for the need for good leadership, and for the coordination structure, increasing recognition of the value of forging deep and long-term partnerships and collaborations. We have our telecommunication firms partnering with some Korean content providers. And that's a start. Okay, that's a start. We do hope that we will have more on that. And then how can we examine, lastly, for the threats? Unfortunately, there are still continued prejudices against innovation and change, and prejudices against for consumption of foreign content, and of course, the continued increasing competition from foreign content. Those are there to stay. Okay, and unfortunately, one more thing would be the lack of permanency of public sector initiatives and programs. The problem is that we are changing leadership every 6 years. It's hard to establish a long-term plan, especially if the next leader will have a very different agenda compared to the predecessor. So some of the concluding remarks, okay, as we wind down from everything I've said up to this point. Okay. So out of all of these considerations, which one should be prioritized? So first of all, we look at the producer's perceptions of creative content. It's a very deeply rooted issue. And as you can see, there are varying opinions for and against the entry of foreign creative content in the Philippines. And this has demonstrated different mindsets and perceptions. Okay. They pose a considerable resistance against advocating a deeper learning and a more meaningful adopting of practices from the South Koreans. So that's one thing that we should prioritize. How do we change the perceptions on creative content as far as the producers and the decision makers are concerned? Okay, second would be the holistic and systematic view. We want to inculcate Now, we want to appreciate the fact that collaborations and partnerships are very critical. Okay, a few organizations operating within the value chain, the supply chain, should not be enough. Okay, it's not enough. It's not enough that just one broadcast company would do everything. Okay, there should be some collaborations and partnerships with other entities that are able to contribute. Third one is the monetary and non-monetary resource management. So this is one of the biggest challenges being faced. So the history demonstrates that the more resources poured into the creative industries, the more that those industries can acquire the technologies, and then the better the content. Same with the skills, the expertise, the know-how. You pay them better, they can produce better quality content. However, that's not happening at this point. Short-term gains versus long-term sustainability issues. Okay, this is a very excruciating management issue. Why? Because producing high-quality content takes time and would definitely be a drain on resources. However, producing tried and tested contents has been a given. Yeah, many of our producers understandably want to get returns on their investments right away so that they can have the money to continue producing content. But we should not be stuck in that mindset where it's always about what is a hit right now, or otherwise known as patok. Okay, what is patok right now? That's the thing. And unfortunately, being able to earn quick and large cash inflows while maximizing asset turnovers has resulted in content being cheap or content being old. Okay, so there's very little room for risk taking. Okay, that's happening there. Okay. Okay, lastly, of course, is the human capital development and sustainability. There is an abundance of current talent and a rich pool of potential talent. We have to recognize that. They only need the direction. They need direction. We must able to create institutionalized, continuous, and sustainable flow of multidisciplinary talent. Okay, we want to have, okay, so for instance, assuming let's say SB19, BGYO, and BINI would be around for the next 5-6 years. But we want to ensure that the system that was put in place for these groups to produce these groups and to produce the content that these groups were able to put out there for us to enjoy has to be institutionalized, formalized. Okay, we want to see something like that. So the creative skills to produce good quality content, but more importantly, the entrepreneurial know-how to ensure that these are economically, culturally, and socially value-adding. Okay. So, in effect, okay, just to summarize everything, we look at the creative industries value chain. There are 4 points. Again, for the value perceptions on value contributions, resolve how the creative industries define value and value adding. For ICT and R&D, we want to invest in high-quality ICTs and R&D efforts and recognize the long-term effects. For instance, just to give a better example here now that I think about it, even the size of the cameras that are being used now to produce vlogs or produce some short content, you don't have to have those big and heavy cameras now. You can have those small handheld recording devices, and those are enough to produce high quality content. Okay, we want to look at knowledge management as well. We harness and exploit, professionalize the natural talent by formalizing and professionalizing human capital development. And internationalization and co-production, we want to establish a balance between being open to new foreign ideas, experiences, and expertise, while at the same time protecting domestic environments. Okay. We also want to look into structural activities. We define how each activity flows from one point to another and how it affects other activities. We learn to look at the choice of actors, define and recognize the roles of all actors and stakeholders. We want to look at the governance mechanisms. We establish and institutionalize strong governance mechanisms, not only to monitor economic performance, but also to protect intellectual property. And lastly, for coordination structures, we enhance and further incentivize networking and collaboration opportunities. So as a parting note, again, being a Girls' Generation fan, I will quote Yisuman, the founder of SM Entertainment, that passion gives birth to effort, which leads to genius. But he believes that genius isn't innate, but something that can be learned through effort. So we Filipinos are very passionate. Okay, and we can have the acumen. Okay, we already have some of the acumen to know what is good creative content and what is not, or how do we produce creative content. But we need to steer. Okay, we need to steer that in a particular direction so that it can be sustainable. It can have a greater audience. It can have a more cost efficient means of production and distribution. So it's important, the importance of structurally directing creativity for enhanced value development and value adding is the one thing that we want to communicate here. And the other thing that we want to communicate here is the importance of thinking about sustainability in directing this creativity. Okay? So these are the two things. Okay, there's two things that at the end of the day, the reason why I want to look at it from a value chain and supply chain perspective is that we want to take it to the next step wherein how can we make it more value adding, and how can we make it sustainable? Okay, how can we make it sustainable for that? Okay, so with that, okay, thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that you learned something out of all of this.
It was actually very interesting to see the process and research behind the production and distribution of these Korean content. Thank you for giving us a whole new lens to view this topic, Dr. Capistrano. And I am sure that our audience also has a lot of questions about that topic as well. So if you have any comments or questions for Dr. Capistrano, please do not hesitate to send them through the chat room. We will have the open forum after the second presentation. Okay, thank you very much again, Dr. Capistrano.
All right, I'll see you
Okay,
later.
now see you later. Okay, now let us meet our second speaker. Bubbles Beverly Asor is an assistant professor at the Department of Sociology, University of the Philippines, Diliman. She received her PhD in sociology from the National University of Singapore. Her research interests are in the areas of migrant organizations, religion migration relations, international migration to South Korea, and South Koreans in the Philippines. Her publications include works on the Catholic Church as an intercultural interlocutor in South Korea, on Filipino migrants' mediated empowerment through religion, and migrant local encounters in religious spaces in South Korea. She is currently the associate editor of the Philippine Sociological Review and the associate editor for Book Review of Asian Politics and Policy. Today, Dr. Asor will present her research entitled Brokering Knowledge as a Soft Power Strategy, the Case of Filipino Returnees with South Korean Educational Degrees. Let us all welcome Dr. Asor.
Thank you very much again. First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to the UP Korea Research Center for giving this opportunity to share my work. This is an ongoing research project that I am working on, and hopefully I could finish it before the new semester begins. Yes, may I start now?
Okay, sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yen. As Yan mentioned, my research project at the moment, this is part of my bigger research agenda, which I am tackling and I am analyzing and examining the idea of mediator, or the middle entity, or the mediating structure of an organization of people, so connecting two unconnected groups or two unconnected people. For this presentation, I am working on, this is the title, Brokering Knowledge as a Soft Power Strategy. And by soft power, I am not taking it at a face value. This is Joseph Nye's concept. I am also kind of deconstructing it in some ways. Soft power here is the kind of capital or resources that a middle power, just like South Korea, possesses amidst bigger geopolitical powers such as China, the United States, and the other countries. And I will be focusing as an illustration using the case of Filipino returnees with South Korean educational degrees. Philippines. Next slide, please. Yes, so for my presentation, I would be giving you first the research problem and the methods very quickly, and then the research context, and then I will be discussing South Korea as a country of education. Most of the time we think of South Korea as a recipient of tourism, as a recipient of, your love for K-pop, for K-drama, just like Dr. Capistrano a while back. But South Korea is also a country of education, producing scholars, foreign scholars, and then these foreign scholars some of them would stay in Korea, some of them would return to the Philippines or their home country or their country of origin. And I abstract this, South Korea being a country of education, within the discussion of internationalization of higher education as a South Korean public diplomacy, which I have equated with Joseph Nye's concept of soft power. And then I will present, just to, bridge my empirics and the context and my data, I would, put them together using a framing. And in sociology, it is very important for us to have a framing conceptually and theoretically. And I will be using knowledge brokerage, and I'll be presenting to you very initial findings and analysis, and my conclusion is anchored on my very initial analysis. Next slide, please. This is my central problem. What is the role of higher education? Like universities, postgraduate institutions in the production of South Korea's positioning as a middle power in the world. When we say middle power, as I already mentioned, it is not legitimized and considered as big and as superpower than the others in terms of size, in terms of capacity and capital, but it has its own power, and we call it the soft power vis-a-vis the hard power. Hard power is the military, more political, while the soft power comes in more of a cultural diplomacy. And let's see how internationalization of education is contributing to South Korea's cultural hegemony. And I am borrowing that from Gramsci very loosely. So my main sub-questions would be, how do Filipino scholars with South Korean educational degrees, which particularly I am referring to MA degree and PhD degrees and perhaps postdoc, translate and transmit what they have learned in terms of knowledge, expertise, and skills that they acquired in South Korean universities and when they come back to the Philippines. My respondents have already returned to the Philippines for a few years, some a year, some 2 years, some maybe more than 10 years already, since they got their degree from a South Korean university. And I will also try to analyze how these knowledge transmission, knowledge transference, if you call it, contribute to the kind of diffusion of Korean branding, if there is such a case in our society, but this is still at a very initial stage. And then my third question, I haven't answered this based on my initial interviews with 10 respondents, but I will be working on it in my journal article. Next slide, please. Yes, so this is the research context, and I'm referring to South Korea as a country of education. When we say country of education, it means that it did not just arise or emerge out of nowhere. It came from a more historical perspective. Using a more historical perspective, let's take a look at how globalization in South Korea started. And globalization in South Korea is not the same in the West, where there is this extreme version of globalization we call the hyper-globalization, where we foresee the demise and the death and irrelevance of the territorial nation state. And when we say nation state, countries, right, in a more political sense, like nation state with our passport and visa and whatnot, as in a more legal sense. In fact, Korea's globalization, the drive for it, was initiated by the government as a state enhancing, always top-down strategic plan, just like Damunhwa or multiculturalism. It was in 1994 when President Kim Young-sam formally outlined it in an APEC meeting in Sydney, Australia, and then which later took off as a kind of globalization fever, and then they call it the Seghewa fever. It was a gravely misused word, narrowly interpreted of economic liberalization, but it was in actuality more nuanced than that. It could be more comprehensive, embracing political and cultural dimension. And it has a lot of differential meanings, just like, damunpa or multiculturalism for those who are studying Korean studies. It could be like a strategic principle. We're using it to introduce ourselves in the geopolitical setting or geopolitical stage. It could be a mobilizing slogan. It could be a hegemonic ideology. We are as good as Japan. We are emerging power, just like China or the United States or even European countries. Or it could be a new identity badge for a state aspiring to advance world-class status. So I call it more of a status drive, Kim Yang-sam's, that I am, Korea being introduced to the world as a newly industrialized and democratized country, deserving membership in the Organization for Economic Cooperation, or the Organization for Economic Cooperation in 1994, 1995. Then came 1997, where there was, Korea was hit by the 1997 financial crisis. And then the next president was Kim Dae-jung. I'll just give you very briefly the historical background so we will understand where this internationalization, globalization in South Korea is coming from, where you have the Hallyu being promoted as a global artifact, if you would like to call it. So Kim Dae-jung's version of globalization from Kim Yang-sam is a little different. It's more supposedly the espousal of participatory democracy and liberal market economy. But just like Kim Yang-sam and even Roh Moo-hyun, for example, or Park Geun-hye, and now Moon Jae-in, for example, the approach of South Korea is very interesting for me as a sociologist, because it's always a top-down command and control reform plan. It's always coming from the government and not from the grassroots or not from the bottom-up approach, just like the globalization in the Western countries. The government resorted to these very command and control style arm twisting to get, the 5 chaebols to follow the state guidelines for corporate restructuring and reform, but without much success. For example, the producer of Parasite is also a subsidiary of Samsung company that's part of the chaebol, just for us, for our information. So this globalization has kind of effect on the individuals, not just the individuals, but also the educational institutions. Let's discuss first the effect of this on the individuals before we go to the internationalization of higher education, which is in many ways 2 levels, I would say: the organizational institutional level, the university, and the individual level, the Koreans trying to study English or going overseas, just like Koreans in the Philippines studying English. They were crazy about English, which is part of this fever of globalizing itself. But it was not just a very straightforward, I want to be a global South Korean. It was also because they wanted to remain competitive. After the 1997 financial crisis, globalization has increased the demands by individuals for higher education to be more competitive with each other. In spite of government efforts, after the 1997 financial crisis, Kim Dae-jung in many ways was successful at the macro level, but not in the meso level and the micro level. And the micro level, many individual Koreans and individual Korean households suffered gravely, right? So they have faced, the economy faced greater challenges than before, especially with the rapid emergence of a very strong Chinese economy. And then South Korea was smuck in the middle between a very high-tech Japan. So Korea has lost some of its, in economic terms, competitive advantage as an exporter. So as a result of this, the government responds to global economy. As you can see in my diagram, there was a sharp increase in higher education, which reflected the human capital, the demand for the human capital to be upgraded. So the government has a concern to enhance global competitiveness of the Korean education system, teaching in a bilingual way, that is the ideal, that is the rhetoric of the government and then the universities as well. And this context had burden, as I already mentioned, on the individual Koreans to be more globally competitive learning English. So they welcome foreign students that they can discuss it, they can practice English with. And then the universities started, inviting foreign students to study. The invitation to study there could be that Americans and Europeans could go there and study in an exchange program through MOA with their respective universities, because Korea is cheaper than their tuition fees in their home countries, while Asian countries, Asian students would go to Korea under scholarship. It could be the government scholarship or the more non-state scholarship. Next slide, please. So if there is K-pop and K-drama, I would say there is also K-education, which is on the rise in the global education market. Since the early 2000s, the number of international students in Korean higher education has increased every year. And there are too many Korean universities as well. If you have visited Korea, you would see that there are a lot. And there are many public and private universities spread in that very tiny peninsula. I mean, in terms of size, it's smaller than the Philippines. So in 2004, there were only about 17,000 of international students. But by 2019, if you can see that, it has surged to 160, showing about 9-fold increase, for example. This vast majority of international students come from other Asian countries, as you would see in the graph. Students from Asia accredited to a whooping 91% of all international students in degree or language programs. So I don't have the data for the more degree type or the language programs. And next in ranking was from Europe, students from Europe, 3.9%, North America, 2.5%, Africa, 1.7%, and South America, 0.6%. So this trend in recent years, well, the claim is, according to the Ministry of Education, there is diversification of nationalities, not, in terms of the worldwide nationalities, but more the Asian international students. In 2013 alone, there are 3 out of 5 international students in Korea were from China. I'm not so sure with the breakdown if they were the Chosunjok or the Korean descent Chinese or the mainland Chinese, and I would assume it would be 50-50 or even more than the Chosunjok. But recently, a few countries in Southeast and Central Asia have been sending more of their students in South Korea. Vietnam had sent 3,000 students to Korea in 2013. And then in 2019, you can check it, in Vietnam, it became, from Vietnam, 37,400 students, accounting to 23% of all international students, while Chinese students would account for 43%. And then even Uzbekistan's Uzbek international students started to pick up in terms of growth from 600 to 2013 to 7,400. That's very big in 2019. The Filipino students in South Korea is insignificant at the moment. I apologize, I don't have the exact number for them, but in my paper, I need to find the statistics for that. Next slide, please. So for me to, as I mentioned, to link my empirics, my data that I've generated from my interviews with KII and my respondents, and the context of the research context, which is South Korea as a country of education, I need a framing to make it conceptual, and I will be drawing it from the 3 works that I have this in my diagram. So first and foremost, let's define what is knowledge brokerage, or who are the knowledge brokers. Marsden, a famous sociologist, defined it as a process by which intermediary actors, in my case, in my research, the case of Filipino students who return to the Philippines and they already have their degrees from South Korean universities, they would serve as an intermediary actors, the in-between, which facilitate transactions between other actors lacking either access to each other or lacking trust in one another, right? Basically, they don't know each other, but this intermediary, because of his or her or their access and their previous experience from South Korea would be connecting to unconnected social actors, which in social network analysis are called the nodes. This brokered exchange, of course, they can have an exchange, in a very direct way. However, they don't know each other, they don't have access to each other, or they don't have trust in one another. So they need what we call the intermediary or the broker. So this broker can be thought of as a relations in between and among three actors, two of whom are actual parties to the transaction. They need each other, the two actors, while the intermediary or broker may implicitly or indirectly benefit from it, but it does not have, or he or she or they don't have the direct, they don't get anything from it directly in this exchanged relationship. I will be getting my, so in many ways, the brokers, Marsden thought that they get compensation in terms of commission, maybe money, or I don't know, honorarium or stipend. Based on my interviews, some of these knowledge brokers get stipend from either one of the two parties. But most of the time, the brokerage service is very diffused. It's like a relationship that they're not very transactional. And then even the how can I say, the service is almost non-existent because you are not operating in a very transactional manner, just like, business in a business sense. So I will be, and then what is a broker? I think I have one more slides for that. Sorry, can you return to the first slide? I will be, the previous slide, sorry. This three, sorry, I'm confusing you. Yes, please, this slide. So these three models will help me. CMEL's triadic model, Golden Fernandez's typologies of brokerage, and hub and spoke model would help me frame as I mentioned, my data and the research context. Yes, let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So who is the broker? If you can see here, the black node, that black circle, we call it the node. The circles are called the nodes. They are actors, right? They can be individuals or they can be organization. It can be a very formal organization or more informal or loose. This black node in the middle, this is the simplest form of relationship where the black node, that one in black, is linking two otherwise unconnected actors, which I already mentioned. According to Feist, the brokers can act as a third party that arranges the connection in order to facilitate access, and the access would carry on very valued resources such as scholarship, such as information, such as collaboration, such as researches, or even scholarships. I think I already mentioned that. The broker, they bridge a gap in social structure. Bert call it the structural holes. And then at the same time, the broker also help goods and informations and opportunities. I forgot to highlight a while back that opportunities are also form of information that are flowing from these triadic relations. And this knowledge would flow across that gap. The line here are called relationships. What kind of relationships? And the nodes or the circles are called the social actors. Next slide, please. Yeah, so can you post everything first? The previous slide, please. Okay, in the Simelian triadic model, I don't know why it's not coming out. This is the foundation of my framework. It is from the work of Georg Simmel. And according to Georg Simmel, there is a sociological significance of the third element or the third party. Right, the person or the organization connecting the unconnected nodes, right? The triad here, the first type of triad, I do not know why it's not appearing. Can you push up any button? Maybe it would appear again. Okay, it's not. Yeah, please return to Simelian. I'm very, I'm confusing you. My apologies. So there are three types or three brokerage types going on. The mediator, The mediator here is the impartial. The third here, or the third party, the capacity to mediate conflict and restore a group to a very harmonious state. It is imperative to remain neutral and jointly committed to each of the parties, the two parties that are being connected who are in conflict. So the successful mediation, we call it mediator, restores the potential for recognition of common interest, thereby strengthening the group solidarity of these three parties, right? The next one is called the tertius gaudens, the third who enjoys. It means that this is the opposite of the mediator, where the mediator does not have any, very impartial arbitration. That's the mediator. The third who enjoys, or the tertius gaudens, it is benefiting and enjoying the conflict between the two parties. The other one is the divide et impera, or the divide and conquer. It is similar to tertius gaudens, or the one who enjoys, whereby there is a strategic orientation. The strategic orientation of the divide and conquer is, I will divide you according to your interest so that it will be beneficial for me. But for this particular study, I will only be using the mediator, coming from Simmel, or George Simmel's triadic model, whereby the mediator is neutral and impartial. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, the next one, that is the foundation of Gold and Fernandez work, the typologies of brokerage. I will be giving examples and illustrations from my data using these. I think I will be using the typology of liaison, coordinator, and my main central type of brokerage is the representative. What are these, according to Gold and Fernandez? From the work of Simmel, they refine the understanding of brokerage. In this case, these five structural forms are very structural. When we say structural, even if there are no very clear, written documents, let's say, the relationship between and among the nodes are called structured. It is structured because it is characterized by the direction of information flow and the extent to which various actors are viewed as members of the same committee. If you take a look at it, there will be two nodes in one group, within this, oblong, oval shape, right? It means they come from the same group or within the same group. The node or the broker is from a different group. If there is a bigger circle, just like in the coordinator, it means the brokerage comes from within the same group, right? So the oval or the bigger circle means they are coming from the same group. I will explain this later. For example, the representative, it means that the Filipino graduate from South Korean University, this one, yes, thank you, comes from Seoul National University. The one who will be, he or she will be connecting one from Seoul National University and then someone from the Philippines, which is in the outer circle. We call this the representative broker. If the Filipino graduate of South Korean University is connecting two unconnected people within, let's say, the same university, it is called coordinator, okay? If this student or graduate would be connecting two unconnected people, but these two unconnected people are within the same group, but the broker is from outside the group. Let's say these two nodes in the itinerant broker, these two nodes are both from Seoul National University, but they don't know each other. The broker will be connecting them, okay? And then the liaison, they are all of them, the nodes and the broker, they are not connected at all with each other. They don't belong to the same group, right? So I will be using this to analyze my data, right? So why are we using this anyway? Your question is, well, what is she doing? What is she discussing, right? Why brokerage? In our relationships with everyone, we are always in triadic relationship or dyadic relationship. The dyadic relationships are more straightforward. The rules are, you are in equal footing, right? But when you include one more, the broker, the relationship would change. Then the relationship would no longer be equal or symmetrical, but there would be unequal or asymmetrical relations because of the access to resources or the lack of trust. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, and then I will also be using what we call the hub and spoke model, also be using social network analysis. So the broker from the ones that I just showed you by Gold and Fernandez, or the mediator from CMEL, would now become a hub where there would be new relationships or different relationships. So there would be a hub, it could be a person or organization, and then this hub would be connecting and linking the spokes. The spokes are, let's say, in the work of migration, which I am doing, on the model that I have used this from, the works of CASES in 2018. For example, the spokes are new immigrants in London and New York. And then the works of Bashi also, studying the new immigrants from, I forgot which home origin. So this means that there will be different forms of relationships and resources and activities that will be shared and linked by the hub to the spokes, right? The spokes may not necessarily be linked to each other. So these are my conceptual framing, or the conceptual framing of my work. Next slide, please. Yeah, please, next slide. Yeah, so let's now go to the findings of my work. The first model that I use is the representative brokerage. Here, as I already mentioned, the one being connected here are supervisor, Korean supervisor, or dissertation advisor, or master's advisor, or classmates, or some friends in Korea, Koreans, or other nationalities. They need something from the Philippines. They don't know anyone in the Philippines, so they will contact the graduate of the South Korean university if they could connect. Him or her or them or the organization to the person they need, whose resources they need, or collaboration that they need from the Philippines, right? So this will be the direction of what we call as representative broker. The representative broker means they come from the same group, the same organization, in this case, the same higher educational institution. It could be Kyanghae, Yonsei, or whatever, right? It could even be some of the workplaces. I've interviewed someone who worked in ASEAN Korean Center, so that is from the same group. So if his or her former boss would need something from the Philippines, from the ASEAN Korean Center, but they need to connect, let's say, with the University of the Philippines, then this broker would be doing the connection, right? But what kind of knowledge do they actually transfer? There is such a thing as tacit knowledge. What is the tacit knowledge? Is the knowing how. These are not measurable. You cannot see it. They cannot codify it. You cannot really see it per se. There is no measure of the tacit knowledge, but these knowledge are quite contextualized and embedded in the experiences in terms of studying, living in South Korea. So those who did not live in Korea for such a long time may not really know it exactly. They may know it, read about it, but they don't know it as a tacit knowledge. Some of these examples are pali-pali culture. Some of these would be navigating the very Confucian hierarchical social structure. Let's say the PhD student, when the knowledge broker was still a student, would have to say yes and would have to do whatever the senior have to tell them, because that is part of a very hierarchical social structure, especially in the academic setting, right? So how will this be transferred, this very tacit or knowing how of the Korean experience or the skills? Some of my interviewees, two of them, some of my respondents are able to publish in like publication machines. And they told me that the skills, of course, that is already an explicit knowledge, but the way they maybe manage their time, maybe the way they rush, I don't like to call it because they did not use the word rush, but the way they maybe plan their publication in the pipeline was learned It was a tacit knowledge that they got from their supervisor in South Korea. So two of my respondents are highly, highly well-published Filipino scholars now that they are back in the Philippines. Some of their publications were written with their supervisors in South Korea. Some were collaborations with other groups in the laboratory that they had, that they belonged to in South Korea. The other one is what Collins called the relational tacit knowledge. Some of the tacit knowledge, such as navigating hierarchical social structures, are learned through reciprocity and trust. In South Korea, the idea of reciprocity is very tacit and very implicit. The seniors would take care of the juniors, and the juniors would have to do certain things for the seniors. More so if the senior is your academic supervisor. More so if, and then most of the laboratories in one of my respondents' experience was they are in a very hierarchical structure. There is the academic supervisor, two of them. Then they have the postdoc who are Koreans, and then the PhD students. And there she was as a newly graduate of a Philippine university. So she went there for an MA program. So she was really at the bottom of this hierarchical structure. So she has to do certain things. She could be, screamed at if she did not do her job very well. And according to her, her training in research was not very clear, very strong from her undergraduate program. So when she went there, she had to learn things like basically from the scratch. So that is also a part of navigating the difficulties of graduate program, of graduate studies, which she was able to bring with her when she returned to the Philippines, right? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. Then the next one is the more explicit knowledge. So there are two types of knowledge being transferred. This is the more codified, documented information, and you can see it. We can measure it. What are these? These are our publications, especially for those who studied overseas. These could be conferences. These could be research skills. These could be co-authored publication. But take note that co-authored publications would just come out because, oh, okay, I like you, you like me. It doesn't go that way. It is learned through the tacit knowledge based on trust. I trust you. One of my respondents is very interesting. He's back in the Philippines, but once in a while, he included his thesis supervisor, his dissertation advisor as a second author. And then I asked him, was he part of the research and the generation of data? He said, that is part of my, I forget the right term, forgive me. I think what he was saying is this is part of courtesy that he was extending to his supervisor. That's why he is part of the what we call guest authorship, right? There is also the training and capacity building. So one of my respondents would go to overseas for conferences. So she was able to go overseas, like in different countries, and she really wanted to do that. And her membership in the laboratory in that particular university in South Korea was able to give that to her. And those are part of the explicit knowledge. And how do we transfer that? So this is the supervisor, thesis. In my work, the role of the thesis supervisor and dissertation advisor plays a very, very crucial role. So A is the thesis advisor, giving all of these explicit knowledge to the broker, which is the Filipino graduate. And then this Filipino graduate would then transfer the skills of mentoring, the skills of editing, the skills of proofreading, the skills of collaborations and co-authorship with maybe a colleague in the Philippines or maybe his or her students in the Philippines. So that is how knowledge transfer is done in this particular model, which is the representative brokerage, right? And then there's also this idea of identity. Where did you do your PhD or MA in South Korea? Let's say you were part of SKY or the Seoul National University, Yonsei, and then the Koryo University, right? And then there is certain kind of status there. There is also this certain demeanor that you possess. We call this in sociology as academic habitus, and that would be part of what I call the tacit knowledge. The skills and experience that can never be codified, but you just have it. It is like, let me put it maybe in a simpler way, it's just like biking and swimming. You just learn it and you'll never forget it. but you don't know, you cannot tell someone how to bike or how to swim. You can teach it, but the one that you're teaching will never get it the way you learned it, for example, right? So that is tacit knowledge, and tacit and explicit knowledge will never be separated from each other, just like trust and reciprocity and the research skills, right? The research skills is how to conceptualize, how to theorize. These are the things that you learn from your supervisor. Even the modeling or the mentoring that you do is also learned from your thesis supervisor. That's why they play a very crucial role. But one of my respondents said that he did not get as much both tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge from the supervisor, but he tried to get it from other people, right? In his circle, maybe among other professors that he had, but not all the time. Some students are not very lucky to have good supervisors. Next slide, please. The next one is what we call the itinerant brokerage. Here, the student or the graduate of Korean University returned to the Philippines. He or she has a job. It could be in the academia, or it could be in the research center, for example, or it could be in the government, right? Then that's called the knowledge broker would be, usually this is the supervisor would ask him or her, can you link me to one of the agency in the Philippines? One of my respondents linked his supervisor or the friend of his supervisor to DOST in the Philippines, right? So this is kind of linking resources and information. But knowledge broker, the Filipino knowledge broker, the student or the graduate, does not have any link or any concern with DOST, and he was not very interested. And then, very interestingly, he said, I did not want to do that again. It was very, very tiring, right? There is new information that is established between, let's say, DOST and the former university, but the broker does not have any direct ownership to that new knowledge or to the new information or the resources. So he said that later on, I will not do that again. Okay, next slide, please. Another example that I got from my data was a winter program that Knowledge Broker helped to establish between a Korean university, I think that's Busan, and then the University of the Philippines. Out of this came a project or a program. It is a 1-month Filipino cultural immersion, 4 to 5 batches of Korean students, around 3 to 7 students per batch, visited the university in the Philippines, which was UP Diliman. So this is part of knowledge brokering. Is this a kind of knowledge? Yes, because this is part of the cultural, because it's an immersion. Aside from learning Filipino, in the University of the Philippines, they were also brought to various, perhaps tourist sites in the Philippines. Perhaps there were also other cultural programs. And then the knowledge broker had to do everything, including tourist guide, teaching Filipino and whatnot, right? So, but he was not part of this group. He did not graduate from Busan Foreign Studies. He graduated from a university in Seoul, right? Next slide, please. Now, here's another model which we call the coordinator brokerage. I think I explained a while back that this is a connection, the broker connecting two people who are within the same group, right? Within the same group, I use it because, let's say, 3 actors, they all belong to the same group, and the brokering happens within the group. Let's say former senior, but you don't know the juniors who will be a prospective students, but you will all be going to Kyunghee University. Or maybe you will all be going to Cheonam University, but you don't know each other because you have different courses. One is from sociology, the other one is from engineering. So the one from, let's say, medicine will be introducing them to each other, and this is where the knowledge transference or transmission would come in. When we say knowledge, again, I will repeat, it's not just the textbook knowledge, it is also about the tacit knowledge. How will I act in South Korea? That is very important. I did my fieldwork there for 13 months, and you have to learn certain things, right, about South Korea, where to go, what to wear, because there are 4 seasons. So you need people who can kind of coordinate you with, let's say, where will I buy my winter clothes, for example, or when you're about to go back to the Philippines? Where will you leave your things because you cannot bring them with you? For 4 years, if you're a PhD student, or for 2 years, if you're an MA student, you will be gathering and collecting a lot of things. So where will you discard them that you will not feel that they are wasted? So you will be, asking for a coordinator within the same group where you can leave your things with. Okay, next slide, please. Now, let's discuss the knowledge brokers as hubs. So the more the broker the more capital, when we say in sociology capital, social capital, cultural capital, so they have learned the ways and means and the way ins and outs of South Korea. Then they will possess higher cultural capital, social capital, who they know, and also economic capital, right? In South Korea, I am aware that the stipend is not as competitive as stipend in, let's say, in Singapore or in other countries. So they really have to know a lot of people so that they can, get and they can earn more money so that it can augment and supplement their stipend, for example. Now, this is an elaboration of Dr. Z. Dr. Z was a broker before. Now, Dr. Z will now become a hub. What is a hub? In the study of Bashi and Cass's work, this one has a lot of capital. They have more, they become, how can I say, very, what is the word for it? They know a lot of things. They earn a lot of capital. They have more resources. Then they can link a lot of people. Dr. Z is from a university in the Philippines, let's say, right? One of the top 4 universities in the Philippines. She was very successful as a member of a laboratory in a Korean university. Then she was able to have a very extensive social network and social capital. She was able to know a lot of Korean professors. And the Korean professors would also be needing students, MA students. So what she did was to go back to her former university in the Philippines, and she started connecting Filipino students who may want to study in the same university, but not in the same laboratory, but linked to other laboratories within the same university, or be linked to other professors. And she even told me that she would approach Korean professors and they say, would you like to work with a Filipino student? I know someone. And because of her good work there, because of her, extensive and publication, she was able to prove herself in that university, and she was able to link Filipino students until she became a hub, right? So a hub has a higher capital that she was able to link a lot of people with a lot of professors and collaborations, not just in South Korea, but also in the international scene, right? Can you please to the next slide, please? A hub can also be a professional organization. So this one is a professional organization of returning Filipino students or Filipino graduates from South Korean universities. So they have this more, at the beginning, it was not very formal. Now it is more formalized, now being recognized by the South Korean embassy in the Philippines. And the linkages here is not people to people, but the linkages would be more of group and the publics. So they link information, the flow of information is towards prospective MA and PhD students, those who want to study in Korea, but they don't know where to go. They don't know which information would be relevant for them. Of course, we can go online, right? Go to Google, put in your keywords and whatnot. But sometimes we still don't know the tacit knowledge, where to go and what to do if I want to study in Korea. So this Filipino professional organization with 100 members and 30 active members provide kind of talks, and then I check their website. They also provide information to students. Let's say there would be a call for scholarship in a particular university. They perhaps send it to this Filipino professional organization. They put it on their website, or maybe through the word of mouth, it will, spread. The next link would be the current Filipino students in South Korea. Maybe this is not very strong. The betweenness or the relationship may not be so relevant at the moment because these are already graduates and these are the current students. Current students in South Korea, like MA and PhD students, I'm pretty aware when I was a PhD student, they have different needs and they have different priorities. Once you return to the Philippines, you are holding administrative work, you are holding different positions, you also are very busy, so this link may not be as strong as before. The Filipino Professional Organization would also be linking alumni of South Korean universities who return to the Philippines. These are the 100 members, 30 active members, and the rest are not very active, but they're still part of that organization. The South Korean Embassy, which gives them grant, which also provide them with information directly from South Korea, mediated, which go through the channel of South Korean Embassy, and then it goes to the Filipino Professional Organization, and the Filipino Professional Organization would spread it to the Filipino public and the target population. Also the Korean state agencies like NIIED, and also Korean non-state agencies providing scholarship like maybe POSCO, Korean Foundation, Wujong, and whatnot. Okay, so this is a form of hub, and the rest, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with different colors. The blue one is the hub. The gray, brown colors are what we call spokes. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I think there's one more slide. Yes, this is the research center. I'm supposed to make it confidential, but there's only, one research center that you are familiar with, but I will call it the hub. This is very tricky because there are not a lot of scholars from South Korea, so perhaps you may recognize who they are. And when I interviewed my respondents, I did not assure them of 100% confidentiality because I cannot assure them of 100% confidentiality because some people may identify themselves through this. So this is a research center. This is a research center. Yeah, let's call it UP Korea Research Center. It is it is embedded in a university, the University of the Philippines, in a more system-wide. So it is not just situated in one unit or like UP Diliman, but it is a research center which covered the entire system, right? UP Baguio, UP, for those who are not from the university, from UP Baguio, UP Visayas, UP Los Baños. The research center is part of that because it is under the OVPA or the Office of the Vice President for Academic Affairs. This one would link Filipino academics in core university. I call the University of the Philippines here like a more core university. No offense meant to the other university. It means that the flow of information comes here first because of this link between the research center, which is situated within the core university. The core university here is the center of the circulation of knowledge. And then there would be a periphery, which goes, the knowledge, information, collaboration would go to the other university for the Filipino academics. And we have seen that in the projects of UP Korea Research Center. It will also link Filipino students when it comes to language training, language classes and whatnot, which is also part of the knowledge transference. Knowledge here is not just the syntax. This is linguistics department. It's not just the syntax, but also the cultural competency, the content of what is being conveyed through that language, right? That's why it is very important hub in the transference of transmission of what is Korean, if we are discussing Korean in the Korean public diplomacy. The next is Korean academics. Maybe some Korean academics may go straight to the research center if they want to be linked to some Filipino academics or some Filipino organization. The logic is the same with the two previous hubs that I presented to you. What is interesting about research center as a hub here, which may not be very strong with the previous hubs with Dr. Z and the professional organization, is that this research hub, because perhaps there is a resident Korean in the hub or the research center, is the link to the Korean community in the Philippines. There is also the link to Korean state agencies, let's say directly, NIIED maybe, Korean Foundation perhaps. And Korean Foundation here plays a very important role in the cultural diplomacy of South Korea. It is the counterpart of Fulbright Foundation of the US, of Chevening of the UK, or Humboldt Scholarship or Humboldt in Germany, for example, right? Or maybe the Erasmus Mundus of EU, for example. So Korean Foundation plays that role. And then Korean Foundation will channel its resources to the research center. And the research center has the capacity to select who they want to distribute the resources and the information to. Recently, during the pandemic, according to my interview and according to what I have gathered in my data collection using digital ethnography, there was a very intensive and very frequent connection of the center to the Filipino public, connecting whatever webinar series or webinar of talks via webinar in Korea, being connected in not just Korea, but also UK. I've seen webinars from UK and other parts of the world being posted and connected through the research center to the Filipino public. According to my interview with the research center, there was even one program where they wanted to target high school students and high school teachers in terms of the dissemination of Korea, Korean culture, Korean history, and whatnot. Next slide, please. Right. So this is still very initial in terms of my analysis. And then it's very hard, personally speaking, to link the meso analysis and then the macro level analysis, which is South Korea as the middle power. This is a macro level of analysis. So I am not claiming that I am able to connect that, but I'm trying. So it is very challenging to assess the effectiveness of scholarship, academic exchange, and public relations between people. Although NSP or the New Southern Policy, I think they did very well in focusing on the people, the people pillar of the New Southern Policy, including I think around 6 or 7 among the 16 tasks are under the people pillar. Right. According to Pustay, in their work in Hungary, internationally mobile students, those who came back, and faculty, those who took sabbatical leave and then they did, let's say, language training program in South Korea or senior fellowship, can be thought of as knowledge brokers. And these knowledge brokers, as I mentioned, are nodes of international networks. Right. It's not just between the Philippines and South Korea. In my case, my field site is Korea, but I studied in another country. So this is part of the node of international networks. I have my own networks in the country that I did my PhD at, but I also have networks with South Korean counterparts and South Korean colleagues, right? They say it becomes a pioneer of international cooperations, mediators of new research methods and research results. Then they become part of what is called as a transnational knowledge network. Why has it become a knowledge network? Through publication. So if you have a connection, okay, this particular professor was my teacher, I would be reading his work and I will be introducing this to my students, and then my students will be also giving it to, maybe if they become teachers and then they go back to the provinces and whatnot, they also become academics, and then it becomes like a domino effect, right? It is part of the distributing essential information about South Korea, the policy, the culture, and not just K-pop or K-drama, but also other things about South Korea, right? They say that people-to-people relations would be very powerful in intercultural dialogue because of the intense and prolonged contact. We cannot understand the culture without that prolonged contact, or if it's mediated through something else, or mediated by, because the tacit knowledge is very difficult to achieve until such time that you stay there, you live in the community, and you embed yourself in the community, right? Next slide, please. So Korean scholarships, like the government Korean scholarships, becomes mediators of cultural policy and cultural diplomacy through exchanges, exchange student programs. Based on my interview in 2000, I forget, around 2009 or 2010, there were only about 7 students from the University of the Philippines who went to South Korea for exchange program. But fast forward to 2019, before the pandemic, there were around 50 students who took the opportunity to have this exchange program or have their semester or 1 year in South Korea, right? I personally know some students of mine who went there in, let's say, Chonam, which is not even part of the core core circulation of knowledge, but they were in the periphery. Of course, it's a very good university, but when I say core, it's because of the soul imperialism. There's also this need. It's ongoing. It's a frequency of continued collaboration, and I think we have to take into account what is the nature of collaboration. Is it just coordinating, just like my respondent who said, I don't want to do it anymore, I'm so tired, I will just be linking my supervisor and the DOST. That was very tiring for me. So that's another nature of collaboration. What is the level of collaboration? Is it more symmetrical or asymmetrical or very transactional, right? One of my respondents said, being a mediator or a knowledge broker helps him to give the Filipino public a more critical thinking towards South Korea. That it is not the way you think it is, based on the tacit knowledge of these knowledge brokers. They live there for what? 5 years, 7 years if they work there. And they say they have this critical thinking towards South Korea. For example, in terms of they have friends who are, parents imposing on them to get married, but their colleague does not want to get married. She wants to stay single. But in the South Korean culture, maybe there is a high demand and imposition by the culture to get married for women, right? So at the more social sense that you need to get married. So there's this Korean drama of falling in love and then finding the perfect man for you. So there are two sides of the coin, right? So my mediator, my respondent said that they provide a critical thinking towards South Korea. Maybe it's just very informal. Their friends ask them about it. Their students ask them for their opinion, but they have this critical thinking towards South Korea. And this is very important because public diplomacy is not superficial, but it is about people and how they live their lives in South Korea. The next one is the tendency of South Korea, and maybe this is one of the hindrance and the constraints of these brokerage and the relationship, the structured relationship is the tendency of South Korean HEIs or universities to hire foreign professors. I call them the white males. I applied for certain positions there, postdoc and certain grants. I did not get it, and then when I check who got it, usually it's from from the global north, white men usually, and usually from developed countries. But then again, they also give a lot of scholarships to Asian students, and then the Asian students, let's be critical about it, becomes cheap labor for some of the laboratories and universities or some professors. South Korea there's a question that we have to ask. Will it be a center of circulation of knowledge, or will it still be in the periphery as a reflection of its geopolitical status as eclipsed by Japan and China and eclipsed by the larger, more developed societies? Next slide, please. Yeah. And then maybe something for us to think about. We never think of international students this way. We always think of international students as very maybe sophisticated, cosmopolitan. They just take photos of the autumn and the spring and the sakura and the cherry blossoms, and they post it on their Instagram. But then again, they also go through a lot of challenges in terms of cultural competency, academic competency that they have to achieve. And at the same time, they are a culture carrier. And then it is through face-to-face interaction that students, that they become graduates, that they are really the ones in the middle between two cultures. And then they can give a testimonial. My respondent said, patotoo, and then this is testimonials of their critical thinking, of their experience in South Korea. And also, in terms of diplomacy, quote and unquote, or soft power production of South Korea in the geopolitical stage, the positive experiences from student mobility and intellectual and social relationships at academic levels can improve South Korea's image in the global stage. These students, when they graduate and they return to their home countries, in many ways become mouthpiece, right? They become mouthpiece. It's great in South Korea. It is not great in South Korea, or where I studied, let's say in Singapore, it was not great there, right? So their positive or negative experience will shape how they will be part of this person-to-person diplomacy. And brokers contribute to, I think I already mentioned, is the transnationalization of knowledge networks. So it's not just about Korea. So Korea, if they want the internationalization of education to be very effective, if they want to be cited in terms of impact factor, which is now part of the education landscape around the world, is they really have to collaborate with some people so that the idea of impact factor, H index, ranking will take off, right? And then, of course, the role of, like hubs, like Korea Research Center, Korean Foundation, in this, discussion of transnationalization of knowledge networks. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I am good. Thank you very much for your attention and for this opportunity to share my work. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Asor. Actually, this topic is very close to my heart because I am one of the brokers Dr.
Oh,
Asor is pertaining to in her research. So we're looking for the completion of that research. Thank you very much again, Dr. Asor. Okay,
thank
so
you.
please use the chat room for your questions or comments for Dr. Asor. We will go to them shortly. Okay. So we will now have our open forum. May I invite Dr. Capistrano and Dr. Asor to share the floor with me?
Thank you.
Okay. So I will be reading a few questions that have been collected throughout the session. So yes, you're free to still drop down your comments and questions. Okay, so for the first question, I think this is for Dr. Erik. So this is from Sam Pabion. How can the Philippine creatives industry be reinforced when it comes to creative creations, especially that the country never falls short on imaginative and innovative industry practitioners, much like South Korea?
Oh, okay. So, yeah, one research that I found, and I found this very interesting and that has potential, which to answer this question, is to have more venues for this. Like give them platforms, give them platforms, give them more venues, but closer to home. Like take for example, we have a creative city designated to Baguio, for instance. I think there are two. Correct me if I'm wrong. Baguio is one, Iloilo is another. I can't remember the other one, but I know for a fact that Baguio is. And one of the recommendations that I found to further reinforce this is to hold local exhibits there and broadcast it in social media. Okay, so just to have it to gain more traction. So that's one thing that I can think of right off the bat that we can do to reinforce this. The second thing is that what I do found very interesting, and I found it for a lot of Western efforts, is the notion of crowdsourcing or crowdfunding for such events. Okay, in K-pop fandoms, this is very prevalent. Like if let's say if a particular fandom wants to put up a billboard or wants to send a photo book to the idol, they crowdsource, they crowdfund. And the organizers would also promise some video or some artwork to be shown on social media. On social media. So that's another thing that probably we could start thinking about. I think the reason why crowdfunding and crowdsourcing is not very prevalent here is, of course, the issues on trust. Okay, the issues on the trustworthiness of the destination for the funds, and then and then probably, of course, we're very fragmented. There's so many of these small name artists trying to make a name for themselves, and that's an unfortunate thing about it. So yeah, just to repeat, not just those two things. One, we can locate those venues for to exhibit their work and make extensive use of social media to do that. And second, try thinking about crowdfunding or crowdsourcing as well to generate more content.
Okay, so there you have it, more venues and a challenge to the crowdfunding option. Okay, thank you very much. Next one, also for Sir Erik. With the rise of K-pop inspired P-pop groups, how are these groups distinctly Filipino that they are able to contribute to the cultural identity and creative industry of the Philippines?
Okay. For one, just to give a concrete example, the debut song of SB19, Go Up, that was in Filipino, and they made it work. Like, personally speaking, they made it work. Like, it's not cringy sounding. It's not cringy. It's not. It doesn't sound cringy at all. It really fit. It really worked. And then when I thought about it, kaya pala natin, right? Yeah, well, we can make this work. So probably, first of all, yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing that we can make it distinctly Filipino. Keep it Filipino. Keep it in Filipino language, right? And then second would be just to try to improve it further. We know for a fact that a lot of K-pop groups are already also doing this recently. Would be the showcasing of Filipino traditional costumes to the content. Right, a lot of K-pop groups have been using hanbok, for instance, to in the showcase of their content. So that's the thing: incorporating Filipino symbols, incorporating Filipino language, incorporating Filipino settings. Okay, settings just to show to the rest of the country, just to show, to maintain the identity of it. We don't have to like outright copy the Koreans, right? With the hairstyles and all that. I mean, that's something. But incorporating certain aspects. But there's a caveat there. We also want to avoid the tendency of overdoing it. Meaning we become OA. And we flood it in such a way that it might look like we're doing product placements now for BOT or something. So we don't want to,
Yes, a very timely comment at that.
we have to avoid doing that. Na it's so much. It's too Filipino naman, diba? It's too much of a showcase of a Filipino thing. So yeah, I mean, those are the things that I could think of off the bat to maintain the Filipino-ness, to coin a term, in the content that we have.
Okay, thank you very much. Another one from Bates Bathan 1. Generator of creative contents are televisions companies. How would you compare TV content creations in the Philippines and the Republic of Korea, considering also the roles of major TV networks?
Oh, a lot. The way that it's set up is something that we should think about. And of course, this is definitely easier than that. Okay, easier said than done. Because the way the South Korean industry works is that the talent, meaning the actors and the actresses and the celebrities, those we see on TV, are not network exclusive. Okay, that's the thing. But there's a separate company managing all of these artists, and the agencies negotiate with the different TV networks for spots, okay, for their artists. We don't have that in the Philippines. Of course, that's totally different. Many of the artists are under the same umbrella as with the broadcasting companies, and therefore exclusivity there happens. That's one of the biggest points that I would compare. Okay, I would compare both the Philippine and the South Korean experience are. Now, of course, there are merits to it. Okay? There are merits to it. The artists can have many content. They have they have a continuous line of projects that's happening, and that's good for their income. That's good for their That's good for their for their careers. But on the other hand, you're now limited to that. Okay, you're now limited to that. But on the South Korean side, if you perform well in one network, okay, case in point, UJ Sok. For those of you who know UJ Sok, okay, the comedian, MC, celebrity, he's appearing in all major networks, like in KBS, MBC, and SBS. He has shows. All that. And he's one of the highest paid Korean celebrities there. So that's the biggest difference that I can say. They both have merits. Okay, they both have merits, but at the same time, they also have weaknesses for that one.
Okay. Okay, so yes, another question. So good afternoon, Dr. Erik. What is your take regarding fan subs? So some of these are in broken English, but these fans do these for free for those who do not know Hangul or Hangugo, Korean language, but are fans of K-dramas.
Okay. Well, first of all, those who are doing the fan subs, I know how hard the work is. So hats off to them. But yeah, but the thing about it as well is that how how do I say it? There's actually an increasing number of fan subs that are paid. Can there be so not a lot of them are doing it for free anymore, but they're getting paid for that. So of course that would raise some obvious copyright issues with that one, and there's actually, and interestingly enough, there's actually an ongoing discourse and debate on how accurate these fan subs are in terms of the context. Never mind the broken English. Okay, never mind the context. Okay, the context are being questioned. So okay, so that being said, it's a very, first of all, you have to recognize the born out of love kind of attitude that many of these fan subbers have. Okay, fan subbers have for doing this. Okay, for doing this. But be very careful as well in terms of the accuracy on the context, okay, on the context of how it's being subbed. If there's one thing I've learned while learning Hangugo myself, is that it's very context specific.
Yes.
Yes, it's very context. So you want to probably. So how do you now look for those people? Like it depends on the fandom. Okay, many of the fandoms would have recognized subbers, okay? And translators and suburbs. And if you know them, give them a shout out, credit them often when you consume their content. That's all they ask. Okay, that's all they ask.
Okay, okay pa. And then let's have another question for Dr. Asor naman. So from Sempabyeong, one can view the Korean creative industry as an economic driver in the country, having Hallyu as an huge export. Despite this, Korea, on a shallow observation, prioritizes the sciences over the arts in terms of scholarship financing, publications, and researches. Albeit not a proper research, this observation is present especially using the statistics of the recipients of the Global Korea Scholarship. So, care to weigh in on that po?
Yeah, thank you, Yan and Sam. Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten the statistics yet, and I don't think it is a very crucial part of my research in terms of what field they are from. I think it's more of, yeah, but come to think of it, yes, the publication will be more and collaboration would be more when it comes to the sciences. I mean, we are also scientists. I mean, the so-called hard sciences. So I will make I will make qualification of that. Yes, I agree, because the two respondents that I mentioned who are highly well published, but one is from social science and the other one is also from the field of can I say it, engineering. So I think it's not a very I will make a qualification in my analysis that maybe in humanities and social sciences the publication would be less quote unquote pali-pali compared to the social sciences, because of the team and the laboratory where they can go for team and co-authored papers in big number, right? So that the publication there is more. And yes, I would agree, I may look into the recipients of Global Korea Scholarship, although this is very interesting because some of them would still get scholarships from private universities like Wujong, for example. So I have to make that nuances and qualifications as well. Yeah, so I really have to find statistics for this. Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes, and a comment from Jen Garcia Cabuag. Thank you very much for sharing your work, Dr. Asor. I'm starting my research outline on education and soft power, and this is very helpful as I proceed. So thank you for sharing your work, which I can cite. Okay, next one. Okay, next one from Dr. Ronel Laranjo. So very interesting research. Tacit knowledge is a really interesting part of your paper. What is the scope and limitation of such concept in your study based on the answers of your respondents?
Yeah, thank you, Ron. I agree with you that the tacit knowledge will always be anchored on the explicit knowledge. Like this is where I draw my boundary specifications. Like, let's say they are well published, or they join conferences, or they did not join conferences. So I would still include that. And where do they draw, and where would they use and maybe reuse the tacit knowledge if they cannot use it in the explicit knowledge transmission. I will really unpack this. I haven't really gotten deeply into my data. I have 10 very long interviews, and I have to do the coding, and I have to do the the 3 levels of coding. So I will definitely keep that in mind, how I will treat tacit knowledge, but definitely this is always anchored on the explicit knowledge, because this is part of the knowledge transference. But many of my respondents also discuss their life and experience. And one of my respondents said, will you interview me for my social life in South Korea as well? And at the time, I didn't really think about it. I was like, okay, I only need academic knowledge here. And then she was saying, I also have social life there, and I would be willing to tell you about it. So I have to return to this, and how I will treat tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge, and the transmission of it towards their home country. Thank you, Ron. I greatly appreciate it.
Okay, back to Dr. Erik. So, in relation to this, do you think it would be possible for the Philippines to have the system of multiple entertainment agencies backed by the government? So, for example, financial support, which might contribute to the overall Philippine creatives industry, like how it does for South Korea?
Wow, that's actually a very difficult question, in the sense that as much as I want to have an ideal setting, the reality is that there's very little. Okay, there's very little in terms of financial support that's happening right now, or for that matter, high profile ones. Okay, at least in terms of the high profile ones. I do have a couple of friends from the NCCA who've been telling me that there are the problem is twofold. One, there is some financial support. Okay, there is some financial supports available, but it's not being promoted and not being availed of. Okay, that's being availed of. But on the other hand, there's actually a conflicting situation wherein our institutions doesn't have enough absorptive capacity to do so.
Oh, okay. It seems like we're having a technical difficulty. Okay, so while we're waiting for Dr. Erik, okay. Okay, so while we're waiting for Dr. Erik, I think I have a question here for Dr. Asor. So, regarding the influx of Filipino scholars studying in South Korea, how does this compare to the Koreans studying here in the Philippines?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. It's not, in terms of comparative study, I think we cannot really compare it. The points of divergences and convergences may not be very fair, because the Koreans coming here pay their tuition fee and whatnot, so they're more into that. And very short term, those who would study for 3 months, 1 month even, during their winter break and summer break, while the Filipinos who go in South Korea are mostly scholars. I assume I haven't met someone who are like paying. Right. I mean, if you want to pay, maybe you would now consider the hierarchy of universities in the world. Like, if I have money, perhaps I would like to go to Princeton, and no offense meant. And this is part of what I was discussing about the core and the periphery of the circulation of knowledge. Those paying may have more capital and choices, right? But in terms of scholarship, we go to particular scholarship because of our research interest, and perhaps of what we want to study and who we want to work with. So I think it's not very, of course, they come here for English in particular, or maybe I know for some students, Korean students who come here, maybe they cannot keep up with that very competitive school system, especially, or maybe they did not make it in their preferred universities. So it's very depressing and distressing for some of them. So they come here. So, when we make decisions for migration, it's not a very straightforward what is this rational choice? Of course, it's rational choice, but there are various factors that we often consider why we go to certain universities, why we go to certain countries. It's not a very straightforward. I'm going to go to Korea for money. It's not like that. There are choices. There are life experiences. There are also life chances. In sociology, we have this very interesting ambivalences between life choices and life chances. Life choices is I badly want to go to a particular university, but life chances will have constraint. And then you make negotiation. This is not too bad. And then you will make some rearrangement of your life courses in along the way. And I think South Koreans who come here are the same. And in the same way that Filipino students and Filipino workers or marriage migrants who go to Korea would do the same thing. They weigh the pros and cons, not in a very instrumentalist way, the way we think of migrants. Oh, they're very poor in the Philippines. That's why they become marriage migrants there. It's not like that. Maybe they want freedom as well. Or maybe it's those kinds of things. Yeah, I hope I answered that question. Thank you.
Okay, well, so maybe we could, Dr. Erik could continue what he was saying a while ago.
Yeah, revert back to that. Okay, so yeah, for the first time, I got kicked out. For some reason. I don't know. Okay, so as I was saying, so those are the two things. Those are the two things that we're looking at. No, so what we have right now in terms of funding and support would be those who want to participate in international film festivals, for instance. Okay, so that's the thing. But if you want, but the thing is, like, what we are hoping for, at least for an immediate next step, would be to cater to communities outside of the OFW markets abroad as far as internationalizations go. Because the reason why many of our Filipino content is being broadcast overseas is simply to cater to Filipino markets. The OFW markets abroad. So you may want to start thinking about you might want to start thinking about let's say when our production or our broadcast networks partnering with foreign entities, taking advantage of what the Film Development Council has been offering, and start producing many of these joint ventures that we have. And I think that's probably the most immediate good first step that we can do. Second thing, as far as, like, say, entertainment companies would go, would probably be one broadcast station is already starting to do it. Getting some Korean talent, okay, to partner with Filipino actors and actresses for some short series or some short dramas. But we have to go beyond the fact that it's an obvious ploy to get someone who's simply Korean to do it. Yeah. Okay, and to participate in that. So we want to go beyond that. So I think those are the things that we can look at as far as getting our broadcast companies being backed by government to do so.
Okay, so that concludes our open forum. Thank you very much for everyone for your active participation. Professors, would you like to have any additional last comments? Okay, so once again, we would like to thank Drs. Capistrano and Asor for sharing their findings and insights. We truly appreciate everything you have shared with us today. So
thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all the insights. Okay, for today. Okay, so before we close today's program, here are some of our upcoming events. So UPKRC and the Foreign Service Institute will host Mabini Dialogue Series on August 6th, Friday 2 to 4 p.m. And the UP Department of Linguistics will host the 14th Philippine Linguistics Congress on August 24 to 26. For more information and updates, please visit the UPKRC and the UP Department of Linguistics Facebook pages. Please be reminded also that the keynote lecture by Dr. Haekyung Lee will follow at 4 p.m. today. Okay, so again, thank you everyone who joined today from the Philippines, Korea, and the rest of the globe. We hope to see you in the future events of the UPKRC and the UP Department of Linguistics. With that, we formally conclude this session. Maraming salamat po. Kamsahamnida. Magandang araw.
Thank you.